On October 22, 1907, the president of the Knickerbocker Trust Company walked out of his office and never returned. $65 million in deposits were about to evaporate overnight. Charles Barney, head of New York's third-largest trust, had been secretly funding a failed copper corner. When the scheme collapsed, so did confidence. Depositors rushed to pull their money, but the trust had only a fraction in cash. Within hours, a mob formed outside its doors. The panic wasn't just about one bank. It was a contagion of fear, and it was spreading fast. Unlike national banks, trusts like Knickerbocker weren't required to hold large cash reserves and had no central bank to turn to. They had invested heavily in speculative stocks and real estate. When the market turned, they were exposed. The public didn't know that the entire financial system was a house of cards, built on interlocking loans and unregulated promises. Augustus Hines, a flamboyant copper magnate, tried to corner the stock of United Copper. He borrowed millions from banks and trusts, including Knickerbocker. On October 16th, the corner failed spectacularly. Hines's brokerage collapsed, and the stocks of his associated banks plummeted. The panic had a face, and it was covered in copper dust. News of the Knickerbocker suspension hit Wall Street like a thunderclap. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 50% from its 1906 peak. Banks hoarded cash, refusing to lend even to each other. Call money rates. The interest on overnight loans to brokers skyrocketed to 100%. Businesses couldn't meet payroll, and factories began shutting down. The real economy was choking. With no central bank, the task of saving the system fell to one man, J.P. Morgan. At 70, semi-retired and ill, he gathered the city's top bankers in his library on East 36th Street. For 2 weeks, they met day and night, pledging their own money to prop up solvent banks and letting the insolvent fail. Morgan controlled the fate of millions, but he needed more than money. He needed information. Morgan dispatched teams of young bankers to audit the books of the remaining trusts in the dead of night. He needed to know which were worth saving. At the Trust Company of America, examiners found a $1.25 million deficit. Morgan famously said, "This is the place to stop the trouble." He pledged $3 million to keep it afloat, but the panic wasn't over. By October 24th, the New York Stock Exchange was on the verge of closing. Exchange President R.H. Thomas rushed to Morgan's office, warning that they needed $25 million in 10 minutes or the floor would shut down. Morgan summoned the city's bankers and within minutes raised $24.6 million. The exchange stayed open, but the crisis had revealed a terrifying truth. America's money supply was inelastic and entirely dependent on private bankers. To ease the cash shortage, banks began issuing clearinghouse certificates, essentially IOUs that circulated as money. Over $500 million in these makeshift notes were printed, bypassing the rigid national currency system. It was an illegal, desperate measure, but it kept commerce alive. The public never knew they were using private scrip instead of real dollars. The panic spread to the stock market, threatening the brokerage firm Moore & Schley, which held a massive stake in Tennessee Coal and Iron. If it failed, the whole market would crash. Morgan devised a plan. U.S. Steel would buy the company, but the deal needed President Theodore Roosevelt's antitrust approval. In a secret meeting, Roosevelt agreed, bending his own trust-busting principles to prevent a depression. The panic subsided by November, but the damage was done. Hundreds of banks failed, industrial production fell 11%, and unemployment spiked. The public was outraged that one man held so much power. Congress launched investigations, and the findings were damning. The U.S. financial system was archaic, fragmented, and dangerously concentrated. Change was inevitable. In 1913, after years of debate, Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act. The new central bank would control the money supply, act as a lender of last resort, and regulate banks. It was a direct response to the 1907 panic, a system designed to prevent another Morgan-style rescue. But the compromise embedded regional banks and private influence, a structure that still sparks controversy today. What would you have done? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe to Ledger Noir and uncover the stories money tried to hide.